Hi, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. This podcast of the People's Pharmacy is brought to you by Squatty Potty Toilet Stools. They create healthy toilet posture for fast, easy elimination. Learn more about toilet posture and health at squattypotty.com. That's SQUATTYPOTTY.com.
Most of us lie from time to time, especially to ourselves. Does the chance of getting caught reduce a person's likelihood of cheating? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Why do patients sometimes lie to doctors? And why might doctors not always be honest with patients? Are there times when deception can be beneficial? Should doctors disclose their financial ties to the pharmaceutical industry?
Behavioral economist Dan Ariely has written The Honest Truth About Dishonesty. He'll tell us what keeps us honest and how we can apply that to healthcare as well as our everyday lives.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, find out how we can improve our moral health.
First, this news.
In the People's Pharmacy health headlines, an experimental antiviral drug is being employed against Ebola. Brincidofovir has been under development for several years against other potentially life-threatening viral diseases, including adenovirus, cytomegalovirus, and smallpox. The drug has already been tested in over 1,000 subjects and does not appear to have serious toxicity. The Food and Drug Administration has granted the company emergency investigational new drug application that will allow physicians access to the medication prior to approval. The drug and its manufacturer, Chimerix, hit the headlines earlier this year when a child, Josh Hardy, came down with a life-threatening adenovirus infection after cancer treatment. When the company made the drug available, the boy recovered. Whether brincidofovir will be a magic bullet against Ebola remains to be seen, but hopes are high that this broad-spectrum antiviral compound could save lives.
Another infection that's alarming public health officials in the U.S. is enterovirus D68. It's spread across the country over the last few weeks. Now, the infection has claimed lives. Although this enterovirus can cause muscle weakness and paralysis, it's not polio. EVD68 is primarily affecting children. The primary symptoms are fever, upper respiratory tract infection, and breathing difficulties. When children develop wheezing or trouble breathing, they may need hospitalization. There's no vaccine or effective medication. The CDC is urging parents to wash hands and keep their children away from others who may be infected.
Prenatal exposure to bisphenol A, or BPA, seems to put children at greater risk of breathing difficulty later, according to a study published in JAMA Pediatrics. BPA is found in the lining of cans for foods and beverages and is a component in many rigid plastic products. It's also found in cash register receipts. The scientists studied 400 pregnant women and their infants. Mothers with the highest urinary concentrations of BPA gave birth to kids who were more likely than other youngsters to have persistent wheezing by their 4th birthday.
Tart cherries have a reputation for being able to moderate excruciating joint pain from gout. Gout results from a buildup of uric acid in the blood and precipitation of urate crystals in the joints. Now, a scientific study demonstrates that consuming Montmorency tart cherries alters uric acid metabolism. The small study was conducted in the UK and compared 2 different doses of cherry juice in healthy young volunteers. One consisted of 1 ounce of cherry juice concentrate in 100 milliliters of water, while the other was 2 ounces of cherry juice concentrate in 100 milliliters. Both doses reduced blood and urinary levels of uric acid. C-reactive protein, a marker for inflammation, was also reduced, and dose did not matter. That's probably good news for gout sufferers, since Montmorency cherries, while tasty, can be pricey.
Research suggests that resveratrol, the compound found in grape skins and red wine, can enhance the effectiveness of a common acne medication. Scientists cultured the bacteria responsible for skin blemishes. They compared benzoyl peroxide alone or with resveratrol. The combination was significantly better at reducing bacterial growth over time than either compound alone. Putting the two together maximizes the impact on acne bacteria, while it minimizes skin cell toxicity.
Researchers have known for some time that older people recover better from heart attacks if they have good social support. Now, investigators report that the same is true for younger heart attack victims. The study included 3,400 patients between 18 and 55 years of age. They were asked about their social support networks. About 1/5 had relatively little support, and they were less likely to recover well from their cardiac events. The lead investigator, Dr. Harlan Krumholtz, commented, "Things like love and friendship make a big difference in the recovery of heart attacks." And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. Have you ever told a fib? You know, a little white lie.
Most of us have from time to time. Today, we'll find out why, and we'll learn how dishonesty may affect healthcare.
Our guest is Dan Ariely, the James B. Duke Professor of Psychology and Behavioral Economics at Duke University. He's founder and director of the Center for Advanced Hindsight and author of The Honest Truth About Dishonesty.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy, Dan Ariely.
Well, it's great to be here and good to see you again. It has been too long.
Too long, and it is wonderful to have you back in the studio. You're a professor of behavioral economics and psychology. How in the world did you get interested in dishonesty, lying, cheating?
So actually it was an interesting case because my first interest actually came from Enron. And what happened was that this whole eruption of Enron happened, and people were talking about it all along. And the question was, what is causing that? And it was very easy at the time to point fingers at three bad people and say, these are the cause. But I also met John Perry Barlow. And John Perry Barlow was a guy I admired. He used to write lyrics and manage the Grateful Dead. And I met him at a conference, and I learned that he was a consultant for Enron, which tells you something about the sociology of the U.S. But what was shocking to me was, here's a guy I admired, and he was at Enron, and how could that be? And we started talking about that. And he told me the extent to which he bought into the Enron view. He said at the time when he was at Enron, he was sure that they are developing a new world. He was sure that the rest of the world just doesn't understand them, that this is a completely different laws of physics and chemistry and economics, and the world is just going to be different. And it was shocking because he was lying in a sense, but not out of any viciousness, but out of pure self-deception and wishful blindness. And I started thinking, John Perry Barlow cannot possibly be the only person in doing that. And is it a better model to think about some of the corporate scandals, some of the things that happen in our lives as wishful blindness more than planned dishonesty? And the reason this was so important is that how you solve dishonesty is very different, right? If you think it's just bad people, you would come up with some types of solution. If you think it's wishful blindness and we can all do it, you would come with very different types of solutions.
Now, help us remember Enron. It seems like it was so long ago. A lot of our listeners are probably going, what's Dan talking about? Enron, what did they do?
So, they basically took a tremendous amount of money out of the U.S. economy at the end of the day. It was an energy company that manipulated and changed prices of energy in different markets. And they use all kinds of tricks to do that. So they were working in the energy domain, but they also had very, very creative accounting. So they were working in the energy domain. There were some interesting things they were doing there. They also have very creative accounting. In the U.S., there's a practice in which you could book future revenues at a discount the moment you submit an invoice. And they used all kinds of tricks like that to create creative accounting. And then they did all kinds of other things to change energy prices. So in the energy domain, creative accounting basically had a tremendous appeal. I mean, the rating agencies loved them. Banks loved them. People invested more and more and more and more. One day, puff, the whole thing went away. Lots of people lost their pensions, of course. And the people that were working there, it's not as if they got the money and invested it somewhere else. Most of them had all their fortune in the company's stock, which tell you that they believed in the company as well. And then the whole thing disappeared.
You know, I think about the big liars and cheaters versus, the little liars, the little cheaters. We've got the Bernie Madoffs and the Lance Armstrongs at one end of the scale. But then there's Aunt Martha, and she has a yard sale, and she makes a couple of $100 in profit. She probably doesn't report that to the IRS.
I'm sure she doesn't. So actually, in addition to the academic research that we're doing, I've also started talking to big cheaters. Mm-hmm. So I also invite big cheaters to come and talk to me in a video studio, and we tape those discussions. And aside from one guy, I talked to maybe 40 people so far, but aside from one guy, they all started as little cheaters. So I'll give you an example. You mentioned Lance Armstrong. I didn't talk to him, but I talked to another cyclist. And this cyclist took 2 years off cycling and went back to grad school to get a master's degree. When he got back, he realized that everybody else is a little faster than they used to be, and he is just the same. And he didn't understand how things were going, so he asked one of his friends, and his friend gives him an address of a physician. Doesn't say anything, he just gives him the address, say, go and talk to this person. He goes to talk to this person. She's a physician. She has a white coat. She has a stethoscope. She examines him, and she gives him a prescription for EPO. Mm-hmm. EPO is a cancer drug that increases the production of red blood cells. If you're doing an endurance sport and you have more red blood cells, that's a good thing to do. He goes to the pharmacy. He gets his prescription filled. His insurance company is paying the main amount. He just has the deductible. He goes back to their training facility, to his room, and he injects himself. And the first time he injects himself, he's clearly doing something that he's uncomfortable with. But he said that it was just the first time. After that, it would just become part of his routine. Anyway, fast forward a little bit, he learns that everybody in the team is doing it. So he stopped doing it in his room. He's doing it with everybody else in common. Then he moves to a different team, and not only is everybody doing it commonly, but they share information and they try different drugs. And the guys who run the team take orders from people. And they say, what drugs do you want for next time? And they bring the supply and divide them between them. Then there's a shortage of EPO. But he knows some people from a Chinese racing team. And they put him in touch with a factory in China that manufactures EPO, and he brings it to his team. And then another team learns about this. So they ask him as a favor to bring EPO for them. Anyway, eventually he's accused of being a drug dealer. Now, you think about that chain of events, right? When you and I, if we just looked at the end picture and we say, my goodness, somebody became a drug dealer, we could never do that. But you look at the first step. The first step was not knowing what was going on, getting a appointment with a doctor and going to see that doctor. And all of the big cheaters I've talked to, aside from one, were like that. They all ended up doing awful things, accounting fraud, insider trading, all kinds of things. But you look at the first step and you say, you know what? Under that social pressure and that environment, I could do that. You look at Lance Armstrong. You remember the interview with Oprah? At some point she asked, didn't you feel like you were a cheater? Mm-hmm. And he said, cheating is getting an unfair advantage. I was just catching up to what everybody else was doing. And when he said it, people's reaction was that he's a psychopath. But the fact is, from all of my discussions with big cheaters, I think he's truthful. That at the moment when you're in it and everybody else is doing it, you don't think of yourself as doing something bad. In fact, the reason that so many of the big cheaters are willing to talk to me is that I think they are basically trying to figure out for themselves how they got to where they are.
Now, Dan, you've got kids.
I do.
And I am quite sure that if one of your children is off doing something you disapprove of, you find out, you call the kid on the carpet, and your child says, but Dad, everybody else is doing it.
Yes.
Not good enough, right?
So it's actually a very, very complex question, because we all have to admit that we teach our kids to lie.
Wait a minute. Nobody would actually admit that.
Well, we do. I mean, think about social politeness.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, as somebody with a disability, I see this all the time. Kids point at me and say, what happened to this person? And their parents put their hand down and say, don't point, it's impolite. Right? The reality is that social niceties, we usually call these white lies, are something that we teach our kids how to do all the time. Don't tell this person that there are, some things are racist and some things are uncomfortable and so on. And we teach our kids to be polite and care about other people and so on. And it is a version of being not truthful. And it's actually a complex thing to figure out, because you can ask yourself whether you want to be married to a person who always told you the truth to your face. But what happened is that we teach people to be socially polite, and then they move to the business world. And in the business world, we don't want them to be polite. Like, you don't want your accountant not to give you the right number because he cares about your feeling. But this transition is actually quite complex. By the way, there's a very nice story in the Bible about dishonesty. When God comes to Sarah and he said, Sarah, you're going to have a son. And Sarah laughs.
She says, how could that be? Here I am. I'm 65 years old, or however old she was.
So
Too old, anyway.
Actually, what she said was, almost, she said, how can I have a son when my husband is so old?
Ah,
she did not think of herself. She was, surprised that Abraham, who was older, of course, than her, how could he still have it in him? Anyway, God said, don't worry. Then he goes to Abraham. He said, Abraham, you're going to have a son. And Abraham says, did you tell Sarah? And God says, yes. And Abraham says, and what did Sarah said? And God said, Sarah said, how could she have a son when she is so old?
Okay.
So God misrepresented.
God fibbed a little bit.
That's right.
Politely.
And the religious scholar asked how that can be. And they basically said that it's okay to lie for peace at home. And I talked to all kinds of religious scholars about that. And they said that Judaism realizes that there are many human values, and honesty is one of them. But honesty doesn't always win. Sometimes it collides. Sadly, sometimes human values collide. And under those conditions, you have to decide what is more important. And honesty always comes from a collision of values. Sometimes it's caring about other people. Sometimes it's caring about our own pocket. Sometimes it's not thinking, but it's always about some collision of values. And it's not simple to tell people to always, always, always tell the truth.
You're listening to Dan Ariely, the James B. Duke Professor of Psychology and Behavioral Economics at Duke University. He has appointments at the Fuqua School of Business, the Center for Cognitive Neuroscience, the Department of Economics, and the School of Medicine. His books include Predictably Irrational, The Hidden Forces That Shape Our Decisions, The Upside of Irrationality, and his latest, The Honest Truth About Dishonesty. He writes a regular column for the Wall Street Journal, and he's the founder and director of the Center for Advanced Hindsight.
We need to take a short break. When we come back, we'll find out why doctors may lie to patients and vice versa.
What about conflicts of interest, financial and other?
Should second opinions be mandatory?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you like this podcast of the People's Pharmacy and want to continue the conversation, you can join us online at facebook.com/People's Pharmacy to share your thoughts or comments. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by Squatty Potty Toilet Step Stools, creating healthy toilet posture for fast, easy elimination. More information about how toilet posture affects your health at squattypotty.com.
And by Redix Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that deeply moisturize to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. The number's 800-345-7339, online at uttercream.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. This is show number 965. The number again, 800-732-2334, or look for it online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today on the People's Pharmacy, our topic is lying and cheating. Why do doctors sometimes lie to patients? And when do patients lie to their healthcare providers?
Our guest is Dan Ariely, the James B. Duke Professor of Psychology and Behavioral Economics at Duke University. His latest book is The Honest Truth About Dishonesty.
Dan, we've been talking about telling the truth and why it's not always necessarily in everyone's best interest to do so. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the implications of your work for healthcare. Do doctors and patients lie to each other?
Absolutely, and sometimes for good reasons. And I'll tell you two aspects from my own life. So I used to have these, because of my burns, I used to have, after a surgery in my right hand, they would put nails that went through my bones. Yeah, after burns and surgery, you can't put cast to prevent the fingers from moving, so they had to do something. And they basically put these long nails in that would keep the bones from moving, and therefore the skin the graft would work. And I was going to have those things for, let's say, 6 weeks. And when I woke up and I realized what those things were, I was wondering how painful it will be to take it out, and when will they schedule the surgery for taking them out. And they told me, no, there's no surgery needed. It's just going to be in the hospital bed. And I said, are you sure you want to do full anesthetic in the hospital bed? They said, oh, don't worry, it's not going to be painful. And I trusted them. It turned out it was very painful. But here's the complexity. I had 6 weeks that could have been filled with fear, or could have been filled with lack of fear. And, I think it's true. I trust doctors less now, or nurses. But I think those 6 weeks could have been much worse if they told me the truth. So that's kind of one thing to think about. The second thing that is been an incredibly important lesson for me is the following story. So maybe 5 years after I left hospital, maybe 4 years, I come back for a checkup in the burn department. And the head of the burn surgery finds me and he says, Dan, I have a new fantastic treatment for you. Come to my office. I go to his office and he is saying that he has a new solution for me. So I'm burned on the right side of my face, not on the left side of my face. So because of that, I have stubble on the left side of my face. The right side of my face, there's no hair, there's no stubble, there are no little black dots. And he's proposing to solve it by tattooing the right side of my face. So and he tells me how it will make me symmetrical. He said, go home, come back tomorrow, shave in, and I'll make you symmetrical by noon. I drive home and I think to myself, what kind of shave should I aim for symmetry? The early morning shave, the afternoon shadow, what would maximize the symmetry? I get to his office and I'm not so sure about that. It's kind of a strange step. And I say, can you show me some pictures of people you've done this before? So he shows me 2 pictures. They look really quite natural. Then I say, what happens when I grow older? My hair becomes white. He said, don't worry about it. We can laser it out when the time comes. So I said, what? I don't like it. I don't like the idea. And then he kind of attacks me and he says, Dan, what's wrong with you? Do you get some deprived pleasure from looking different than other people? Do you like looking different? Do people feel sorry for you? Are you enjoying that? And I was a little shocked with this guilt trip. But I left his office and I went to his deputy and I said, what's going on? And he said, well, they've done this to 2 patients already and need a 3rd for an academic paper. Now, here's the thing. You can look at it this way and you can say, this is just terrible. This physician was trying to get me to do something against my will because he wanted a paper. What a selfish SOB. But here's another story of the same physician. I lost the right half of my right eyebrow in the burn. And he wanted to fix it, and you know what? I couldn't care less. So many things were wrong with me. Half an eyebrow was not high on my priority list. But he insisted. So one day, I said, you know what? I'm not doing a special operation for this, but I'm going into a big hand operation. If you can come at the same time and do it at the same time, we'll do it. So he comes on that day, but it turns out that the hand team is taking too much space. So he has to wait until they finish. It takes them about 10 hours. It was a very delicate operation. They finish the operation, and then he starts his work in the 7 in the evening. And you can think that transplanting an eyebrow is simple. You just take some hair and pluck them in. No, you have to actually get the blood supply. So he takes a Doppler machine. He tracks a blood vessel going into a particular piece of skin. He isolates that piece of skin, a blood vessel going back with microsurgery, redirects it and gives me a half an eyebrow. The guy basically spent most of the night doing that. And this is Israel. This is socialized medicine. There's no money involved. There's nothing but altruism here. This guy sadly died 3 years ago, and there's no way for me to think of him as anything but a wonderful, caring physician. I feel I owe him so much. But at the same time, at that moment, he wanted that paper out, and he wasn't doing it on purpose. But his worldview was colored by his desire to help other people with this paper being out. And I think that's for me, a good kind of lesson about dishonesty. We don't do it because we're bad people, but we have an incentive way to view the world. Lots of things influence our worldview. We care about people. We want some more money. We want to see promotion at work. We want our company to succeed. We want to win a competition, all kinds of things. And what's so interesting is that we're able to see reality in a different way, in a way that is selfishly good for us rather than objective. And lots of lying come from that particular problem.
Dan, I suspect that doctors oftentimes think they're doing the best for the patient, especially if it's a bad prognosis, and they don't want people to, despair.
Yes.
And so maybe a little white lie, what's the harm? Equally, you kind of alluded to the fact that there might be a conflict of interest in this particular doctor's case. And I'm just wondering about the physicians who are involved in a clinical trial, and they're trying to discover new treatments that'll be beneficial for people, but they need an extra 20 patients in order to complete the trial. Or maybe they're even getting paid by the drug company to go out and give talks about the drug. How does conflict of interest affect people's integrity?
So conflicts of interest is one of the terrible maladies of modern society. And it's kind of interesting. What is the best business in the U.S.? What gives you the best return on investment? It's lobbying. And the reason for that is that because you can buy somebody a sandwich and a beer, and all of a sudden they like you a little bit better and can see life from your perspective. Now, that's a really wonderful thing. Right? In a social way, the idea that you could buy somebody beer and all of a sudden they see life from your perspective, what a wonderful thing to have in society that allows us to become friends more easily. But you combine that in the business world, and all of a sudden life becomes really dangerous. You combine it with politics, become even more dangerous. So conflicts of interest are a really terrible and interesting biases, because not only are they big and substantial, but we don't see how they operate on us. So once you start seeing life from somebody's perspective, you can't help doing it. And, we've been having discussions with all kinds of pharmaceutical reps. These are basically incredibly charming men and women who go to doctors' offices and try to convince them to get particular drugs. And they have more and more regulation these days, which I think is incredibly important. But they play all kind of psychological tricks on these physicians. For example, they basically are figuring out which pharmaceutical rep is the favorite of each physician, and they are the one who visit them. They also try to figure out who the nurse likes the most, because the nurse sometimes is the gatekeeper for access to physician. And they change their accents depending on who they talk to. They change their political affiliation. They try to do things that are friend-like with the physicians. Baseball, basketball, going fishing, doing all kinds of things. Of course, inviting them for dinner, bringing dinner with them, all kinds of trinkets in the office. One of the most interesting one that people don't recognize is free samples. If you're a doctor and you get free samples, you don't feel like you're in a conflict of interest because you're just giving them away. There's nothing that you gain from it. But the fact is that the pharma rep just made you a hero in the eyes of your patients. And the shocking thing is that doctors just don't see it coming. They don't see it's working. By the way, the sophistication of these pharmaceutical reps, they told me that one of the things they do is they get doctors to give talks to even a small audience, And they don't care about the people who are listening. They care about the doctor themselves. So if you remember this notion of cognitive dissonance is the idea that once you behave in a certain way, your beliefs would follow, right? So you spend a long time pursuing somebody romantically, then you say, why did I do that? You say, oh, I must really love that person. So kind of if this is why playing hard to get is actually good to some degree. So what they do is they get somebody to give a talk, and that person later says, why did I give this talk? It probably means I really liked this drug. So they do lots of ways. They're paying people, they're funding their research, there are things that are more clear and less clear, but they're creating tremendous conflicts of interest.
When we talk about conflicts of interest, and I think this is implicit in what you've said, the financial conflicts of interest, we can pretty clearly say, oh yes, we can all recognize that. But there are conflicts of interest that are not financial, that are more, for example, intellectual. And this is something Joe and I have been really interested in with respect to the FDA. So, for example, the National Transportation Safety Board is the government agency that checks out when an airplane crashes or a train crashes to see what went wrong in that accident, right? We don't have anything like that for drug disasters. So as a drug disaster starts to unfold, the people who are checking it out are the very people who approved the drug. And they actually have, we believe, but we haven't studied it formally the way you can, but we believe they have a conflict of interest because they approved it. Mm-hmm. And saying, oh, this drug, it's really bad, would therefore reflect badly on their initial decision.
So there's no question that you're right. I mean, I don't think anybody could be in that position. And again, it's not about being bad people. It's just about being people.
Right.
If I made a particular decision and now there's evidence, and the evidence is never crystal clear. There's always shades of ambiguity. And I caused something, right? I didn't just approve it. I can think of my responsibility as actually being very high. I think it's inhumane to expect anybody to be objective in that case. And this is why conflicts of interest is not something we could deal with by just informing people about it. It's something that we just need to eradicate. You know? So you say, okay, my car mechanic has a conflict of interest because they get to recommend what I should do with the car and they get paid by doing that. You can say, well, the easiest thing to do is to go to two car mechanics. One suggests what to do and you tell them, look, I'm not going to treat the car here. You're just going to make a suggestion and somebody else who just does the work.
But you pay him for his diagnosis.
That's right. But that's, maybe not worth it.
Though we don't do that very often.
We don't do it. But in medicine, that's what second opinion is supposed to be all about. The rate of people who go for second opinion is incredibly low. Another interesting thing is we did a study about second opinion in dentistry. And we described a situation to people who said, would you go for second opinion? And people say no. Then we said, would you recommend for somebody else to go for second opinion? They said absolutely yes. So what happened is that people sometimes recognize the value of it. But part of the challenges in the medical profession to go for second opinion is that it feels like a betrayal of your personal relationship. So imagine you're my doctor, you give me a diagnosis, and I say, thank you very much, I really appreciate it, but you know what, would you mind if I go for second opinion? It is kind of offensive. It does say, I don't really fully trust you. Now, it's incredibly important, but really hard to do. I actually think that in this case, we need to take it out of the hands of patients. I think patients just don't have the social ability in the doctor-patient relationship with the power differential to basically say, I want a second opinion. I think it should be mandatory to go for second opinion in some cases, and the patient would have to work hard to cancel that. But that should be the default operation. So I'm not betraying our social bond in any way, but this is just how things are.
Now, Dan, you're all about research, and there was a study not too long ago involving 2,000 physicians, and about a third of them in this survey said medical mistakes don't need to be disclosed. About a fifth did not agree that physicians should not tell untruths, and about 2/5 did not think they should disclose their financial relationships with drug and device manufacturers. I think patients, in theory, would like to have that information. If a misdiagnosis was made or a mistake occurred, I think patients want to know, but a lot of physicians don't think they need to share that.
Yeah, so there's lots of different things here. So, look, I think that patients should trust physicians. I think trust is incredibly important. And the issue here is, of course, that the physicians don't want to disclose because they're going to give up trust. And I think it's a complex relationship. I would say physicians should have no financial relationship with drug companies, right? That should be the golden standard, and then people could really trust them. If they start having a financial relationship with drug companies, the fact is that they are less trustworthy. And I think this lack of trust should be aired out. Now, my real concern is that patients are not going to take it fully into account. And I'll just describe to you one study on this. So imagine I'm your advisor. And we have a jar of money, and I say, you see it only from across the room, I see it from close by, so I know I have more data. I see things more clearly. And in one case, we have aligned incentive. The more accurate you are, you make more money and I make more money. The advisor is good in that case, no problem. In the second case, we have misaligned incentive. I get more money if you overestimate. You get more money if you're accurate. And now the advisor are exaggerating, and the person making the guess, you in this case, are making a mistake and I make more money. And so people are, lying, giving bad advice for their own pocket. You can think of it as physicians without disclosure. In the third condition, it's physicians with disclosure. I give you advice, but I say, just so you know, I get paid more if you exaggerate. So now you, as the person receiving the advice, you know to discount my advice. And indeed, you discount my advice. But as the person giving the advice, I know that you're going to discount my advice. The question is, do I exaggerate more? And the question is, which of those effects are bigger? Are you discounting my advice more, or am I even further exaggerating? And the results show that the person giving the advice is further exaggerating. And in the disclosure condition, they even make more money, and the person getting the advice is losing even more. So disclosure, I think we think of it as a solution, but disclosure relies on the fact that the person getting the advice is going to discount it sufficiently, and the person giving the advice is not going to feel even freer to be biased. And so far, I think there's no good evidence that this is indeed the case. So I think disclosure is really, it sounds good, but I don't think it's the solution. I think the right solution is just not to tempt people with conflicts of interest to start with.
You're listening to Dan Ariely, the James B. Duke Professor of Psychology and Behavioral Economics at Duke University. His latest book is The Honest Truth About Dishonesty.
Coming up, we'll learn about the 3 types of patient dishonesty.
Why do people tell the truth when it's not in their best interest?
Is punishment a deterrent to bad behavior like lying?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. If you're enjoying this People's Pharmacy podcast, why not head over to our website where you'll find a wealth of information on medications, conditions, home remedies, and ways to keep yourself healthy. You'll find it all at peoplespharmacy.com.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Squatty Potty Toilet Step Stools, creating healthy toilet posture for fast, easy elimination. More information about how toilet posture affects your health at squattypotty.com.
And by Redix Industries, makers of utterly smooth foot cream with shea butter, helping dry, cracked feet feel soft and smooth. The number's 800-345-7339, online at uttercream.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of today's show or any People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 965. That number again, 800-732-2334. Or look for it online at peoplespharmacy.com.
We're talking about dishonesty. What are the reasons so many people lie to others as well as themselves?
Our guest is Dan Ariely, the James B. Duke Professor of Psychology and Behavioral Economics at Duke University. He has appointments at the Fuqua School of Business, the the Center for Cognitive Neuroscience, the Department of Economics, and the School of Medicine. His books include Predictably Irrational: The Hidden Forces That Shape Our Decisions, The Upside of Irrationality, and his latest, The Honest Truth About Dishonesty.
Dan, we've been talking a little bit about dishonesty in healthcare, but we haven't really gotten into the patient side of things. So, the doctor asks the question, how much do you drink a week? And the patient says, 1 or 2 glasses of wine. Or, how are you doing on that weight control program? Oh, yeah, I'm really eating healthy food now. Forgetting to mention the burger and shakes that he had just yesterday. So do patients, kind of exaggerate what they're eating, their lifestyle, their healthy approaches, as much as doctors sometimes shade the truth a little bit if it's bad news?
I'm not sure who does it more, but the reasons are very different. But by the way, one more thing about the doctor side. Recently, we've walked around the hospital and looking at how doctors give really bad news to patients, mostly news about end of life, hospice, cancer. And they're doing a terrible job. And they're doing a terrible job actually for, understandable reason. I mean, I don't know what's the worst news that you ever delivered to somebody, but for me it was firing people or sometimes romantic breakups. And I've not been good in doing that. And, it's not you, it's me kind of stuff. And there was a time, but when doctors have to give really bad news and there's a shade of gray, they talk in code, and in their mind they hope that the patients understand what they're saying, but the patients doesn't really understand what they're saying. So there's no question that doctors shade things, sometimes for their interest, sometimes for the patient's interest. Patient on their side, I think there are kind of 3 types of dishonesty. There's the dishonesty that the patient does and don't even realize that they're doing. Like you really forget the burger, or you forget you didn't take the medication, or stuff like that. Now, if we put you on a lie detector, you might, remember, but you're not really thinking that you've done anything badly. The second thing is about approval, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but I feel judged in a doctor's office, right? It's somebody from authority that told me to do something. I promised to do it. How comfortable do I feel about breaking that promise? And then sometimes there's planned dishonesty, right? Sometimes there are people who really want a particular drug, and they know the doctor is unlikely to do that. I tried it, by the way, once. I had an interesting... every year I have a discussion with the students at Duke about what bothers them from an honesty perspective, what are kind of the topics on their mind. And one year it was Adderall.
Which is a stimulant drug that a lot of students like to use to stay up late studying for exams. And
it's prescribed for people with attention deficit hyperactivity problems, but a lot of people like to use it without a prescription, right?
That's right. And what the students said was, look, it's really easy to get. You go to the doctor, you say, I don't feel like in focus, and they very easily prescribe it because they want to prescribe it for all kinds of reasons. And the student take it, and they say, so what's the difference if I go to the doctor and lie about symptoms? Is this different? And really, I can't concentrate because none of us can concentrate to the degree we want. And they say, it's like drinking 15 cups of coffee. That's legal. Why is this not legal? I mean, they made all kinds of stories, but they were wondering what's the extent of it. And if you could get a prescription, why is it okay to take one without a prescription? And what? Anyway, I was very curious about this, so I went to my doctor and I took the DSM, the guiding for psychological disorders, and I read to my physician. I didn't read, I didn't open it there. I memorized it, and I told her that I have all the symptoms from attention deficit disorder, but she didn't buy it.
No Adderall for you.
No Adderall for me. So there is these I think planned dishonesty with physicians when somebody like me go to the doctor. There's a particular drug that I feel I want, and I lie on purpose. But even those things, I think most people sleep well at night after that. They don't feel that they are lying. They don't feel that they're doing something. We have tremendous ways to rationalize a lot of dishonesty.
I'm wondering if your doctor trusts you now.
Well, she left Duke, so I have a new doctor now that is untainted by my past behavior. No, but my doctor also, she knows what my research is all about, so her first reaction is, okay, what are you studying now?
Right.
Dan, why do people tell the truth? Especially if it's not in their own self-interest. The question is, well, who ate the brownies? Well,
I ate the last one.
what happened to the money, honey? Do you know how fast you were going, young man? So, there are a lot of times when people do tell the truth, even though it may not be in their self-interest. Why?
That's right. And actually, it's a bigger puzzle than the other one, right? Because the dishonesty one, you could say, well, people are just selfish, and we understand selfishness. The value of truth is really very interesting, right? So we do hold this idea of being truthful is very, very dear. And from that perspective, we're very different from the animals. So let's say if you have a colony of monkeys, and if you're a low-level monkey, if you find a piece of fruit, you're supposed to give it to the high-level monkey. But if the high-level monkey doesn't see you, they're not going to get it, right? It's all about being caught. We actually feel bad about being dishonest. Now, we don't always feel bad, and this is what is the real issue. By the way, this is kind of an important notion, because what causes us to behave well and not well is not whether something is legal or illegal, it's whether we feel bad about it or not.
So guilt.
Guilt. This is why corruption is such a big problem, because with corruption, you don't feel bad. You know it's illegal. Right? In countries where you can pay a bribe to a policeman, you don't feel bad about it. That's what everybody does. So you know it's illegal, but you don't feel bad about it. So the really interesting thing is, how do we internalize these social values about what's good and bad, and what influences that? And here are kind of two examples to think about it. There's lots of people in Wall Street, as we know over the last few years, that basically have easy way to pocket lots of money from their shareholders, from their customers, and so on, and they don't feel bad about it. Those same people would probably not go to your wallet and take $1,000 or $100, even if they knew they couldn't get caught. Right? It's not about being caught. It's about some things don't make people feel guilty, like shaving a fraction of a penny from each transaction. Some things make them incredibly guilty. And I'll give you a more personal example for this. In the last few years, every time I go to a restaurant, I ask the waiter if there's a way to eat and escape without paying. And I say, look, I'm not going to do it, but if I were going to do it, what would you recommend? And sometimes they ask for my credit card, but mostly they give me good advice. Wait for a big group to come in, there's an alley, there's a bathroom. They have suggestions of how to do it. And then I say, and how often do people do it? They say almost never. They say sometimes, in fact, people forget to pay. They leave, and then they call back and say, I forgot to pay, here's my credit card number. And you can ask yourself, how would you feel? Let's say you went to a restaurant, and I say there's a 100% sure way to escape without paying. And you know what? Even if they catch you, you can say, I forgot, and just pay, and there's no downside consequences. You would still feel evil if you did that. On the other hand, think about illegal downloads. Nobody feels bad about these things, right? And they're illegal. It says illegal downloads, right? So the difference really is not about probability of being caught. It's about what we define ourselves in good and bad. And this is why education is so important. If you think about the theory of punishment, you have 3 periods. You have the time before we commit a crime or a dishonest act, the time during, and the time after. Punishment is all about the time after. And we say to ourselves, people will think about punishment, and therefore they will behave well. There's actually no evidence for this. There's no evidence in health that people think long-term in general. Sadly, the death penalty shows no improvement no reduction of any kind of crime rate, right? You think if people thought to the future, they say, oh, this particular crime, I could get killed for it, not worth it. But there's no evidence for that. So we focus in punishment on the period after, where in fact what we should do is think about the time before. How do we create guilt? How do we create social bond? How do we get people to figure out what's right and wrong? I think physicians have the oath, but I think we need to go much beyond that. We really need to give people standards for rules of behavior and what's acceptable and not acceptable. Every time there's a shade of gray, there's a danger that people would interpret it the wrong way. I think we need to be a bit more religious-like, and give people specific do and don't do rules that basically would protect us from making mistakes.
Dan, what about whistleblowers? Because whistleblowers oftentimes, get fired, for one thing. They get, really angry looks from their coworkers and obviously from their bosses. And seemingly they don't get much in return, although there may be some monetary rewards because of the Whistleblower Act. What causes one person to step forward and say, hey, there's a problem with this company or this organization, or the doctor made a mistake and he didn't share it, in the case of a nurse perhaps, and other people who just go along and get along?
Yeah, so, the Whistleblowing Act was changed recently, and the amount of compensation people can get now is really, so it was always substantial, but now it's huge. So I get lots of whistleblowers writing me, and aside from one person, they're all women. And I think it's a general phenomenon. It's not just the people who write to me. And I think that the real issue is not being part of the boys' club. So the reality is being a whistleblower is really a betrayal. And many of those whistleblowers that write me say that not only are people at work don't talk to them, their regular friends stop talking to them. Because you're really showing something incredibly deep about your lack of respect for the social fabric. I think about my kids. They're 11 and 8. They're lovely kids. But when they have problems, we say, don't tattletale, right? And it's kind of interesting, like, why are we against that? If there was some injustice done in their system, they should feel free to go to us as the parents, and we are the lawmakers, and we can reorganize things. But we still don't want it, right? There's a betrayal that is happening there. And I think for whistleblowers, what's happening is that they're telling people that they are not deeply ingrained in the social fabric, and therefore they're less trustworthy in all kinds of other aspects. This is why I think that promising these people more money is not necessarily the right solution. And the reason I think that women have an easier time is not because women are necessarily more moral. I think they're just more for outsiders. So it's easier for them, sadly, because they're not integrated in the same way into the old boys club, it's easier for them to basically become a whistleblower. There was a company, a health insurance company, that said that they basically sent people a letter saying, here is what your doctor told us that they did to you. Is this true? And they said that the only time that people react is when they're angry with their physician. That their physicians could add all kinds of things to that list, and they just don't react because it's their social bond with the physician is stronger than the social bond with the insurance company. It's only when that social bond goes away. So my suspicion, and it's just suspicion, is that the people who are becoming whistleblowers are not just good, but they're outsiders and they're pissed off about something else.
So Dan, what is the message for patients? If physicians are sometimes shading the truth in that gray zone with regard perhaps to a diagnosis or regarding a treatment, or in your case, pain, is it going to hurt, doctor? And how much will it hurt? Do we demand the truth, or are we okay with the deception?
So I think there are two different cases here. The first case is case where knowing the truth will not change anything about our decisions, but could only change our peace of mind. And I think in that case, some deception is fine. Look, we have self-deception. It's an important psychological mechanism. If a physician tells me, you're going to go do this operation, it's not going to be very painful, and I can't not do it, then I think that some deception is okay. And my guess is that physicians, if they're attuned, could basically sense the level of self-deception that will be helpful for particular patients. And I also think that we need to think about the family members as well in that picture. And then there are cases where knowing the truth could change the decision. And then I think life is very, very different. And I think those are the cases of conflicts of interest to a large degree, when a physician has treatment A or treatment B, and treatment A is better for the patient and B is better for the physician. And under those cases, I think we should need to either eliminate conflicts of interest, or if they exist, doctors have to tell the truth. These are not the cases where we should spare people's feelings, because the decisions that they make could be so crucial.
Dr. Dan Ariely, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
My pleasure. It was a little dark topic, so hopefully next time we'll talk about something a little happier.
You've been listening to Dr. Dan Ariely, the James B. Duke Professor of Psychology and Behavioral Economics at Duke University. He has appointments at the Fuqua School of Business, the Center for Cognitive Neuroscience, the Department of Economics, and the School of Medicine. His books include Predictably Irrational, The Upside of Irrationality, and his latest, The Honest Truth About Dishonesty. He writes a regular column for the Wall Street Journal and is founder and director of the Center for Advanced Hindsight.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Russ Henry engineered today's program. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
The People's Pharmacy is made possible by Redx Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Extra Care 20 Cream, with 20% urea for extra skin protection. The number's 800-345-7339, online at uttercream.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 965. That number, 800-732-2334. Or find it online at peoplespharmacy.com.
When you go to the website, you can check out prescription drugs, herbal medicines, and home remedies. You can share your own experience and thoughts on today's show. Look for our combination offer of Dan Ariely's book, The Honest Truth About Dishonesty, together with the CD of today's show.
Sign up for our free online newsletter or the free podcast of the show. You need never miss another People's Pharmacy program again. It's all there at peoplespharmacy.com.
In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Please join us again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to The People's Pharmacy.